I chuckled earlier when Garth said that he chased me around there, or, etc., because I'm not a good speaker. I'm just someone that's learning as I go, and I'm trying to do the things that I like to do. And I like hacking computers. I like learning about controls. I like learning how to bypass them. And I like sharing knowledge and getting knowledge. I wouldn't be anywhere that I am without the open communities that provided me the chance to enrich and grow. And I'm really thankful to OWASP. I'm thankful for all the open groups that I've associated. And I'm really thankful for the individuals I've come to contact with. Because I'm just a guy who bought a computer because I had a learning disorder. I don't know how to spell. I don't know how to write one. So I bought my first computer, and that's how I've grown into the business. So today I'm going to be talking about building a secure software development lifecycle. And, we all manage things. We manage the operating systems we put on computers, and we patch them. Why we patch them? It's because they're not static entities. They grow with time. So let's see. Yes. All right. Is that how it's going to work? All right. So again, I'm a contractor. I'm not a consultant. I get paid to do specific things. There's certain things that I really love about life. I love privacy. I love freedom to communicate online. Electronic Freedom Foundation is one of the groups that I'm associated with. And all opinions that I express are solely my own. So before I begin, arriving at a process isn't something that doesn't happen without effort. It isn't just magically going to come into our organizations or that we're going to arrive at unless we work at it. So there's no magic that happens. I was looking for a dancing unicorn. I could not find one. We've all heard of Heartbleed. And, I'm not picking on Robin. Robin was a programmer working on fixing some things in OpenSSL. And he just happened to miss validating a variable and defining its length. And I think that through the process of instituting a secure software development lifecycle, we can try to mitigate these things that come up. Gartner. I love Gartner. I hate Gartner. I'm not here to proselytize Gartner in any way, but they came up with a 10-key diagram. And I want to talk about this 10-key diagram. I want to talk about components of the 10-key and artifacts that we can insert during the process of the 10 keys. And that's it. That's it. But we're going to talk about key 0, and it's training. I don't know how to do this. I learned how to program. Now I've got to learn how to program securely. I've heard stories of other people saying I felt really horrible when someone brought my code back to me and said it was crap. None of us want to be in that position. So organizations have to, and individuals have to take the time to find training. Now, I believe that, again, training is an essential element. Again, it's not something we can bypass in our organizations. Training enables competence. It doesn't have to cost millions of dollars, and it should be based on open standards from open communities. That's part of the thing I love about OWASP. Now, I'm going to talk about some OWASP guides and some OWASP projects. I'm not going to dive too deeply into them because I hope that, and I've heard that other people will be talking about these projects at a later time. But I'm going to talk about the projects in two ways. I'm going to talk about their guidance, and I'm going to talk about their artifacts and how they can help each portion of our 10 points of developing a secure infrastructure by giving us artifacts that we can build on. So let's talk about planning. Let's talk about individuals that come together and decide to write software. Whether they're project managers, whatever type of stakeholder there are, they're going to need something to help them base and define not how their software functions, but how they can continually maintain their software by being secure. And again, I'm not going to pick on any one group. I believe, yes, project managers care about security when cost, delivery, and manageability are considered. And I think that as we work in our organizations, we've got a voice, and we should also proselytize, we should communicate these things inside the groups that we're working in, so they can grow. Again, I'm going to talk about, yes, there's a huge burden of cost that's lifted when we properly plan software. I'm skipping over that slide. So, talking about planning, what the heck would we do to help a planning body know how to implement secure controls into software? Well, heck, OWASP has this wonderful thing called the Application Security Verification Standard. It's made up of 19 controls, some of them have been redacted and moved around and shifted around, 182 control objects that help us look at each stage of how we would form an application. Now, although we're talking about web applications, it kind of applies to almost everything else. So, I know someone's going to be talking about this. I don't want to go through it too deeply, but for planning, by providing them the OWASP ASVS and discussing it and talking about it and going over the requirements and the control objects therein, you can help your planning bodies create milestones, create JIRA stories that help tackle and ensure these artifacts are embedded into software that you're developing. Let's talk about creation, where all the magic happens. And yes, I'm going to go over the same thing too. I'm not out here to slight anyone. Developers get thrown under the bus for any reason. Anyone gets thrown over the bus for any reason. Usually the problem is there's no formalized ABSEC process involved in the organizations or groups that they're in place with. So if we're going to talk about what we can do to help them, we could talk about development models such as test-driven development. We could talk about instituting tools for them. Now I've redacted, this is one of the tools I use almost daily. I've redacted the company that provides it, its name. On the slides, if you pull down the slides, you'll find out what the tool name is. But we've got to provide our people with the right tools. But again, it all comes back to training. If we haven't provided training for developers to help them create secure software, these things just don't magically happen. I was learning to develop software. I never once saw in the first language I learned to actually program in was Microsoft C. I came back from Haiti, and actually before I left to Haiti, I worked with Microsoft C, and I had the manual and I learned how to write functions, but no one told me how to secure a function. So training is an essential part. Again, the beyond training is to train our software developers to think like an attacker, to challenge the assumptions and the trustworthiness of our inputs. So input validation, parameterization. Gosh, if we go back to OWASP, we go back to the top 10, if we go back to common vulnerabilities, they've got a great cheat sheet that can go through all these things. I'm going to skip over that. And I'm going to go back to OWASP ASVS. Again, software developers can use ASVS as a cheat sheet to help them when they're building any type of controller process. It will give them artifacts that are targeted to any specific functionality that they need to use. And I really love it, but I'll let someone talk about it detail another time. Let's talk about step 3, verification. Code's been planned, code's been created. Now we've got code that we're going to statically analysis. That's where we prop up the code and we go through it either manually or an automatic method to examine the code, or we go through dynamic analysis where we run the code and we look for artifacts while we're running the code. Again, there's a few other methods as well. It's funny though, most organizations that I've been involved with don't do a lot of this. If the code runs and the code works well, they haven't really looked at it for the common OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. They haven't looked for the CWE, common programming mistakes that developers make. So again, this is a process of educating your organization to bring in tools, to bring in speakers or bring in discussions in talking about how to verify and to ensure code is secure. Again, OWASP has a manual for it, the code review guide. Now, it's a little dated. It's somewhere in the future they're going to be posting version 3 in an updated manner. But the essential elements of looking at code are in there, and it's a great project to look at. Again, another example. Let's talk about this. So I believe that any control that we write has, this is my steal from Monty Python. Every control is sacred, every control has purpose. But there is a template for us to ensure that they're secure. So anything that we write, it's original, we are. It's just a control. We're trying to attempt to do something. So there is a template that someone else has thought of or someone else has published that we can look at to measure against our code and ensure that we've actually done it in a proper manner. Skipping through, again, we can implement software tools that look for embedded vulnerabilities and programmatic mistakes in our code. We can insert, for example, OWASP Dependency Checker. It's a fantastic tool, it's free, and we can insert it into the build process to look for those third-party code that we've used as tools or libraries to insert into our code, and make sure that they're up to date and there's no outstanding vulnerabilities in them. You would be amazed at how often that when I'm looking at code that it worked for us back then, but it's never been updated and addressed. And that's part of our attack surface, and it's part of the portion of global intelligence that we need to look at and research while we develop applications. Let's talk about step 4, pre-production. So development has had its chance with it. They've developed code, they've launched it, QA's gone through it for functionality, and it's gone into a pre-production environment. And we might test it for reliability and reliance by using something like Netflix Chaos Monkey, or we can attempt to see about input validation by pen testers like myself doing fuzzing validation or checking the QA's actual functionality test and performing our tests against how the functions should work and going through it. Or we can grab ASVS and go down those 19 control requirements and 182 control objects and test the application line by line for those controls within the application. And these are things we can do. Another thing I'd like to rant about right now is segregation environments. How many organizations find it too expensive to stand up replica environments in their organizations so that development, QA, pre-production, staging, demo, whatever they call them, are all alike? So that when we test software and we're looking at software, software is functional. So I believe if you build environments that replicate each other, all groups can work at the same time. I don't know what the word for that is in English. But, and that they're not impeded by each other. And when you're testing the code, you've got code tests that are valid based upon what's going to be coming back for development and fixing and QA, etc. So let's just skip over continuous development and go to the release cycle. Now, in the release cycle, we're actually delivering the code to our clients. And in the release cycle, we have a few things that are happening. We have production deployment, of course, and we have post-production activities. That means everything that we couldn't get done before we actually released the code, and maintenance support. But one of the crucial things is we obtain feedback from our end users. Now, we build software as a product. Everything is software, by the way. Software is the animate that moves all the inanimate objects that we call friends. Our phones, our cars, everything has some component of software. And in the release cycle, we can hear back from our end users. And we're going to get feedback from them. Some things that work for them, some things that don't. And we're also going to, let's go back to my graph. In this period, we're also going to find things that we need to adapt and go back to plan and create. So we've got that circular, continuous development that happens during it. So I'm going to talk about configuration, and I'm going to talk about putting it all together, scaling the systems properly, building the systems properly to house our applications, that they're configured properly, that they provide service and deliver service. This is also the time that, that we institute measures to control and delimit our environments. We institute our verification checks, we institute our defense in depth of our security measures, and then we go on to the next steps. Detection. So I've used this slide before, and I've talked about this before, is we don't need to monitor in our systems everything that's fine and dandy. We need to learn to build monitoring systems built on deviation, and I call it deviation monitoring. So alert generation has to look for not the 200s, but, or maybe it's a 200, but where a control, an input and output isn't as expected. They're your SOC teams, your security teams, those teams together have to have data that they can quickly analyze. And if we don't build very good exception events in our applications, if we don't build logging and decent error messaging in our applications, we don't really have a place that detection can take place and we can secure our software. So I'm a big fan of what I call deviation monitoring. Okay, response. Because we've built an application, because we've mapped it, because we understand all the controls involved with it, because we've defined our inputs and outputs and our validation methods, we give our teams that monitor software clear, I want to say metrics, but metrics isn't the right thing, it's artifacts so that they can look for deviation in their security events, and so that they can build response mechanisms. I'm playing with a product out there. I'm sorry I didn't remove the name of it. I don't care about one logging system or the other, but it's no good getting so many results unless you're getting defined results, and you're getting defined results that are exceptions. let's talk a little bit about step 9, which is prediction. You've built software, again, that's a known item. You know every single piece of third-party code that you placed into it. You know the infrastructure it's being housed on, the operating systems, the services, those components. You know your configuration. We've got a place to do global intelligence from. We've got a place that we can actually assign someone or assign a team to go out and ensure and monitor changes in those environments. I like to look at bug logs from softwares and issues on GitHub. Is open. You know, I look for bug or is open label bug, and I go through a Git repository for something that I'm looking to target. And I look at the vulnerability and I look at the nature of the vulnerability and how I can leverage it to my own use. And in this prediction event or stage, we can actually assign resources to manage and to monitor the resources we use as a company or a group or an individuals. You know, with this, we go on to the next step, which is adaptation. You know, in a prediction. So such a fancy slide. Oh, I want to talk about saying about. I should have talked about this a long time ago. Is everything that we use is bloated unless we create it ourselves, unless we define it. You know, we go out there and get some distribution of Linux, or we grab some commercial operating system. Everything is bloated. You've got to define it and ensure that it's delimited to the purpose and scope that's used. That doesn't really fit into prediction. I should have moved it in configuration, but such is life. Adaptation. Again, in adaptation, we collaborate, we speculate, we learn, we watch the interaction with our applications, we watch the providers of code and code snippets we use in our applications. We watch the operating system vendors that provide it, and we watch the inputs. And through this process, we can find what's the next big thing that we've got to target or refine in our application. Then we're back to planning again. That's a nice little slide about it's a variable. Anyways, that's my discussion for you tonight, and it's really about abstract depends on you. I'm Duncan. You can reach me at that email, or I'm 12 years old and you can reach me on that Twitter handle. No, I don't drink. Not until I'm in Vegas. I don't drink to excessive amounts in other places. It's just a silly name. But thank you for your time. Thank you for letting me present. And does anyone have any questions? Again, thank you to Garth and OWASP for letting me have this chance. I really appreciate it.
Oh, questions, don't stop. So what if there's an organization that isn't doing any of this well because they exist? What would you suggest they start with?
I think they start with the discussion that is important to them, and can it increase their success in what they're trying to do? I mean, I'm contracting to an organization that won't be named that didn't have a vetting process to perform certain tasks, or they didn't have a secure software lifecycle. And I said, you know, I as an individual that's a member of their team said, I brought it to them, and you can bring it to them. You know, you can be that little missionary of software evangelization, you know, and you know, that's it. Anyways, sorry I missed the comment. That's okay. Thank you. Is that answering your question? So bring it up, discuss it. There's lots of good resources. Pierre.
Yes. So I really like when you said about third party or you have to monitor maybe that known issue or whatever.
Yeah.
But most of the organizations I deal with, they don't even know what they have.
All right.
So I think that's the.
How do we find them?
Yeah.
Well, we can either find them manually going through the code and actually looking for their inclusion in the code. We can write parsing scripts that I have had to done in the past to go through all the code that an organization uses for an application. Or we can use tools that during the build process harvest these things. OWASP dependency check is one of them. It goes through an application and it finds the code that's used within the narrow band of languages and build environments and supports, but it still works pretty well. I've worked at some huge I've worked for some profitable companies that weren't using it, that turned it on and said, expletive, this is free and it works. And they were very surprised. Stumbles only swears in Vegas. Doesn't swear here. Too much to repent for. Anyways, so thank you for your question.
One question. You mentioned the SDLC. How do you see this approach fit with the agile methodology?
Well, I think agile is a process we take to break down large components into small components that we can assign, build metrics on, and develop. Agile is just a process of breaking down very big tasks into very small tasks with monitoring and completion metrics. So I think this is a whole bunch. I think this applies 100%. I mean, in the planning stage, you're going to create your epic, and then you're going to break down your stories. And to populate these stories, you're going to need a framework. And that's where I've leveraged ASVS to help me institute security artifacts into different development processes and functions and types of communications of sessions or how data is handled. These are various requirements inside of ASVS that work. So I think it's totally applicable to an agile environment. And I think this Gardner diagram that I lifted and used is all about an agile process. It's perfectly in line with it. Do you agree?
I hear your response.
All right, thank you. Thank you. I thank you for your question.
For those that don't know, what does ASVS stand for?
Well, I think, and I'll say it again, and I've mispronounced the acronym maybe 6 times, but it means Application Security Verification Standard. And it's an OWASP flagship project, and everyone's got to look at it tonight. It's homework. You got to look at it. You got to go Google it, or DuckDuckGo it, or whatever you use to bling it, whatever your search engine is of choice. Or just go to the GitHub repository for OWASP and look for ASVS. Version 3.01 is 3.1 or 3.12, I can't remember which standard is right. I think it's 3.01. That's great. It will change your life. It will change your life. Now, I'd like to also thank everyone that brought pizza while I'm trying to lose weight. This is the first time I haven't had 4 slices in one go of the night, and I thank you.
Good job.